Amanda, my brother's girlfriend, was in search of her first apartment. She had decided to move out from her parents' house, which saddened my brother. They had only been dating for a few months, so he wasn't ready to move in together. Amanda chose to explore the option of finding a roommate online and began browsing through Craigslist. She came across an ad titled "Roommate Wanted, Females Only," which was quite common in the area she was looking at, as it mostly consisted of young professionals. The listing advertised a room in a house for around $225 a month, which was remarkably cheap compared to other places. The current occupant, a 23-year-old student, specified her preference for living with female roommates and mentioned that the other roommate wouldn't have a private room or bathroom. Despite the listing having only a single photo of the exterior of the property, Amanda was intrigued. She sent an email expressing her interest in meeting the occupant and touring the house. Within 30 minutes, she received a reply with all the necessary details and a designated time to visit. The girl worked late hours and suggested Amanda stop by at 8:00 p.m. When Amanda arrived at the address, she noticed a handwritten note on the front door stating that it was broken and to use the back door instead. As she walked around the house, she observed that it appeared nice but somewhat unkempt, with tall grass, weeds, and dusty windows. However, these minor details didn't raise any immediate concerns for Amanda. She followed the instructions and knocked on the back door as instructed in the email. A man opened the door, initially causing Amanda to doubt if she had come to the right place. However, he reassured her that the occupant, whose name he couldn't recall, was not present and that he was the landlord. The occupant had asked him to meet Amanda since she was working late. He seemed friendly and offered to show her around. Though the situation began to raise some alarms in Amanda's mind, they weren't at red alert just yet. First and foremost, the man appeared to be in his 40s, unshaven, and gave off the impression that he may not have a stable living situation. Additionally, only the kitchen light was on, casting a dim glow throughout the house. As they explored the house, Amanda couldn't ignore a significant red flag. There was no furniture at all. The landlord answered her questions politely, but appeared irritable about keeping the lights on for too long. He rushed her through the rooms, allowing only brief glances. There was one room in particular that the landlord refused to open, claiming it belonged to the occupant, and he wanted to respect her privacy. Walking down the hallway towards the living room, Amanda noticed that the front door had a broken plank across it, indicating it was definitely damaged. Her internal creepiness radar started to sound off, prompting her to conclude the walkthrough and leave. She tried to remain polite as she thanked the landlord for showing her around, but then he suddenly perked up and mentioned he had forgotten to show her a recently furnished basement, which would make a great recreation room. He insisted that she take a look downstairs. At this point, Amanda and the landlord found themselves standing in the small hallway that connected the living room and the back kitchen. The basement door was located there, opening outward and creating somewhat of a barrier between Amanda and the back door. When the landlord opened the basement door, it revealed complete darkness. He smiled and motioned for her to go downstairs, saying, "Ladies first." Fortunately, Amanda received a timely text message just as a random person parked in front of the house. Thinking on her feet, she pretended it was a phone call and answered, "Hey, yeah, are you here? I'll come out from around back and let you in. It's great, you have to see it." Acting confidently, she excused herself past the confused landlord and swiftly walked out through the back door. The man watched her with a perplexed expression as she made her way outside. Without hesitation, she sprinted to her car and sped away. When Amanda arrived home, she wasted no time in recounting the unsettling experience to her mother and my brother. The authorities were contacted, and Amanda provided her statement. They'd initiated an investigation, only to discover that the Craigslist post had already been removed. Furthermore, the house had been foreclosed over 6 months prior, and the property had been abandoned. During the police investigation, it was revealed that the closed room the landlord had refused to open was actually where the man had been staying. Inside, they discovered a distressing scene. A pile of old and dirty blankets scattered around, rotten food, and empty gallon jugs strewn about. Adding to the unsettling ambience, the man had covered the room's walls with torn pages from adult magazines, leaving one wondering where he had even obtained such materials in this day and age. However, a true horror awaited them in the basement. The man had placed a thin piece of fishing twine at shin level, cunningly positioned about halfway down the stairs. Descending into the basement, they found another accumulation of worn-out blankets, a broom handle entwined with leather belts, and a small box containing various rolls of tape, duct tape, electrical tape, and more. Given the disturbing discoveries, Amanda wisely chose not to move into that apartment. When I turned 21, I decided to transfer to a college in San Francisco. To find a place to stay, I browsed through rental listings on Craigslist. I came across a modest 2-bedroom apartment that was conveniently close to campus and had affordable rent. It seemed like the perfect spot. The current tenant, Beth, a 29-year-old woman with tall stature and jet black hair, welcomed me into her living space. Beth appeared friendly, albeit somewhat reserved, but she agreed to let me move in. Initially, everything seemed fine. On my first night there, Beth and I went out for pizza. It was during that outing that I noticed something slightly peculiar about her behavior. Throughout the dinner, she kept insisting that I resembled Shia LaBeouf, an actor I bore no resemblance to. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply shrugged it off and thanked her. It didn't make much sense to me. Upon returning home, she asked if I had seen my room yet. I replied in the negative, prompting her to show it to me. To my surprise, the walls of her room were adorned with posters of Shia LaBeouf. She had even printed out numerous photos of him and placed them all over her mirror. It was an unsettling sight. It became evident that she had an unhealthy obsession with the actor. As the weeks went by, I rarely saw much of Beth. We hardly spent any time together. Whenever she returned from work, she would hastily retreat into her room for the rest of the night. I often heard her creepy, high-pitched giggles echoing through the walls. I couldn't help but wonder what she was up to. Occasionally, she would emerge from her room and engage in brief conversations that would invariably be marred by slurred speech. This led me to suspect that she consumed excessive amounts of alcohol. There were moments when she wouldn't say a word, but simply stand in the hallway, silently observing me in the living room. I would turn around, catch sight of her, and awkwardly greet her as Beth. This would be followed by an uncomfortably long pause, eventually broken by her eerie, high-pitched giggle. Being around Beth made me incredibly uncomfortable. There was something about her that sent shivers down my spine. One night, I abruptly woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of the front door being unlocked. As I emerged from my bedroom, I noticed that all the lights were off, but I could still make out Beth standing by the front door. She had pressed her face against it and was incessantly turning the lock back and forth, muttering my name, Max, Max, Max. The sight of her in the darkness, whispering my name, sent a wave of fear coursing through me. Adding to my unease was her striking resemblance to the girl from The Ring, only bigger in size. Without making a sound, I quietly retreated back to my room, attempting to sleep. On another night, I was watching the movie Gladiator when Beth stumbled out of her room and abruptly switched on the living room light, forcing me to pause the film, which was quite irritating. She then asked if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uncomfortable transition into the topic, but I reluctantly agreed and awkwardly settled in to listen. However, within 10 minutes of her story, Beth became increasingly agitated, raising her voice to a point where she was screaming about their breakup at the top of her lungs. I worried that her hysterics would attract unwanted attention from the neighbors, but she paid no heed to my pleas to lower her volume. Amidst her furious outburst, she said something that sent chills down my spine. In the midst of her fit, she bellowed, "I'll slit his throat." That statement was a major turning point, leaving me unsure of what this girl was truly capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had witnessed thus far was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she abruptly thanked me for listening, and resumed her unsettling giggle. I wasted no time in making my escape, swiftly retreating to my room in an attempt to find solace in sleep. However, an unsettling feeling lingered within me, knowing that there was no lock on my bedroom door. In a feeble attempt to create a makeshift barrier, I pushed my dresser against the door, hoping it would provide some sense of security. I jolted awake in the middle of the night, startled by the grating sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. It was Beth, forcefully pushing my door open. Panic surged through me as I quickly switched on the light, shouting at her to stop. Through the partially open door, I caught a glimpse of her intoxicated state, accompanied by a crazed, unsettling look in her eyes. Acting swiftly, I pushed the door shut and sternly commanded her to go to bed. I could hear her stumbling back to her room, but sleep eluded me in the aftermath of that disturbing encounter. The following morning, my heart sank as I stepped into the hallway. There, lying on the floor near my door, was one of her steak knives. Goosebumps prickled my arms as the realization struck me. It brought back vivid memories of her threatening to slit her ex-boyfriend's throat. Determined to address the situation, I confronted her about it. She claimed to have no recollection of attempting to open my door or even disclosing details about her past relationship. Frustrated and unnerved, I had reached my breaking point. Since my lease was on a monthly basis, I swiftly found a new place and moved out within a month. About a month after vacating the apartment, I received a sudden contact from Beth. However, I had my phone switched off while I was at the movies. When I eventually powered on my phone, I was taken aback by the sight of over 40 text messages from her, flooding my inbox over the past 2 hours. The contents of those messages were completely unhinged, ranging from mundane greetings to outright expressions of hatred. It was an alarming and unsettling experience. Choosing not to engage, I refrained from responding, and thankfully, I never heard from her again. However, the lingering question always haunted me. If I hadn't barricaded my door with a dresser, would she have silently entered my room and carried out her chilling threat? A few years ago, I was attending a university in a major city, although I usually resided in a small town, over 70 kilometers away. Consequently, I had to find a room to rent. Eventually, I came across a 4-story building where most of the rooms were occupied by various students. The flat assigned to me was located behind a door that led to a narrow corridor, stretching about 5 to 6 meters in length. On the right side, there were 2 doors. Behind the first door was my roommate's room, followed by a kitchen that was somewhat unhygienic due to its combined setup with a bathroom. As in old buildings, such conditions were not entirely surprising. At the end of the corridor, there was a spacious room where I would be residing for a year. Initially, things seemed quite promising. My first roommate, a friendly female student, made my experience enjoyable. She even cooked on occasion, which was a lifesaver since I had minimal culinary skills. However, her studies came to an end when she became pregnant and had to bid farewell to our shared living arrangement. This marked the arrival of my second roommate, whom I lived with for nearly 6 months. Interestingly, I couldn't recall his name even after spending considerable time together. This fact alone should give you an idea of our relationship. He was a 22-year-old student, and his face was a blur in my memory. We rarely crossed paths since our schedules differed due to his work and my studies. At first, we simply ignored each other, and everything seemed fine. But then, strange occurrences began to unfold. The first warning came in the form of a call from the landlord, an unsightly elderly man with particularly awful teeth. Some were missing, while others were dark yellow. However, I couldn't fault him as a landlord. In fact, he was quite decent. Once, I accidentally overpaid him, and he promptly returned the excess amount. He owned several flats in the city that he rented out to students. During one of his monthly visits to collect rent, he informed me that he wanted me to keep an eye on my roommate. Apparently, something had happened at his workplace, possibly involving a physical altercation, and he seemed to be rambling about it during his financial discussions with the landlord. We paid our rent in cash, not through a bank account, which necessitated these monthly encounters. Later that day, upon returning to the flat, I discovered an uncovered mess. It looked as if an elephant had sat on everything, leaving debris scattered throughout the entire room. My roommate was pacing in circles, attempting to clean up the aftermath. Curious about what had happened, I asked him, and he mentioned something about a party gone wrong. Now, you may be wondering why I didn't immediately leave at that point. The truth is, I come from a sheltered background, having grown up in a small town in a relatively peaceful European country. I had never encountered drugs or witnessed any crimes in my life. So, despite his odd behavior, I chalked it up to a bad day. I decided to retire to bed, or rather, the mattress I slept on. Falling asleep was challenging due to the noise coming from the kitchen. I even ventured there to request some quiet, startling him in the process. He seemed genuinely surprised by my speaking up, responding with a vague assurance. As a result, the noise subsided slightly. While the fact that the kitchen remained a mess despite his constant presence should have been another warning sign, I failed to connect the dots. In an attempt to secure my room, I placed a table near the door, acting as a barricade. Additionally, my roommate had his right foot in a bucket for reasons unknown. Around 4 a.m., I was abruptly awakened by his furious screams, demanding that I open the door immediately. His voice exuded anger rather than fear, making me doubt the presence of a fire or any imminent danger. I firmly declined, but he responded by forcefully kicking the door, causing the table, along with the computer on it, to be pushed back. A significant part of the door frame broke off as well. He stormed into my room, screaming incoherently, accusing me of planning something against him. Although he didn't physically attack me, his relentless shouting and destructive behavior persisted. In the midst of the chaos, he even shattered a ceiling lamp using my favorite cup, which had been resting on the table beside the computer. On the verge of a panic attack, I texted my father, who was unfortunately over 60 kilometers away, explaining the situation. He attempted to call the police, but due to some peculiar rule in this country, they could only intervene if a direct witness or victim made the call. Consequently, there was no immediate help from them. A nonsensical policy, in my opinion. The next half hour was an unsettling experience, to say the least. My roommate continued his incoherent screams, seemingly convinced that I posed a threat to his life. He further ravaged the flat, preventing me from leaving my mattress, as he blocked the sole exit. When he noticed my gloves, he nearly assaulted me, convinced that they were evidence of my role as a hitman, designed to leave no fingerprints if I were to kill him. Charging toward me from a mere half-meter away, he suddenly recoiled, screaming that he wouldn't allow me to end his life in that manner. This bizarre routine played out repeatedly, with him entering my room to scream unintelligibly before swiftly exiting. Eventually, I managed to persuade him, undoubtedly the most challenging test of my persuasive skills, to let me leave without taking the keys, assuring him that this would ensure his safety. You can only imagine the fear I felt as I made my way through the corridor, with him in the kitchen behind me, surrounded by knives. Wearing nothing but pajamas and clutching my phone, I sought refuge in another apartment within the same building. This unit was occupied by a relative of the landlord, along with 2 other individuals. I had previously met the relative where the landlord couldn't collect rent personally and requested that I hand over the money to him. They kindly offered me some tea, and I stayed there until the arrival of the police. Once the authorities arrived, I returned to my room to pack my belongings, focusing on valuable items like my computer and books. My roommate remained in the kitchen while the police attempted to interrogate him, albeit with little success. He seemed unresponsive, but appeared to have calmed down from his earlier manic state. Eventually, the police left him there, instructing him to go for a walk and clear his head. Meanwhile, I left the flat and waited at a safe distance. After an hour, my father arrived and picked me up, driving us back to my hometown. A few hours later, the landlord called me to visit the flat. Surprisingly, my roommate was still there, having another mental breakdown. The landlord promptly contacted the police once again as my roommate barricaded himself on the balcony, threatening to throw things at people below if he wasn't left alone. This time, The police arrived in full force, practically dragging him out of the building. Unfortunately, I have no precise knowledge of what happened to him afterward. Following that incident, I doubt I'll ever willingly have a roommate again.